Hey, what is up, everybody? It's Mr. Honeya here, giving you some notes today on housing rights. So, if you go through the outline and you go through this PowerPoint, you will learn all about the housing rights, and this will build on your knowledge from the worksheet that you guys have worked on for the past couple of days. So, let's go ahead, get this started, fill out your notes, turn them back in so you will get your 100. Let's get started. So, housing rights and responsibilities. So, we all know from the great Spider Man movie, with great power comes great responsibilities. And typically, it's your house, your rules, meaning that you can do whatever you want. Fantastic. You own the house, it's your house, your rules. You get to do whatever you want, but you have responsibilities while you live there. So your biggest limit is basically the government, especially with your state, local, and your federal government, because you have government policy and laws that are enacted at each area. So, first thing I want to discuss is the Fair Housing Act. Now, we all know that our country does not have the best history when it comes to marginalized people and people who are different, and they've enacted laws and they've discriminated and everything else. So in order to combat that in the world of housing, we have the Fair Housing Act, which prevents discrimination on 7 classes. Those are race, religion, color, sex, national origin, disability, and familial status. So Fair Housing Act is one to prevent discrimination. If you see discrimination on a test or a quiz, it's probably the Fair Housing Act, the correct answer. So another law that could be, or policy type law thing that could be in place, is zoning. So zoning is a restriction on how your land can be used. So typically zoning exists in two parts. You have residential zoning where land is used for residential areas, apartments, housing, things of that nature. And then you have your commercial industrial zoning where it exists for businesses. Typically, they want to try to keep those separate as possible, but in some cases, they can kind of intermingle a little bit, but not as much as you think. So, zoning restrictions do vary. And, the whole reason they do this is because, if you think about it, if you had, like, for example, a factory next to your house, and that factory is pumping out, disgusting grossness into the air and it smelled really bad, well, you would live next to that and you would smell it every single day. And that would kind of affect your enjoyment of life, enjoyment of your house. So it'd be like, why would I want to live here? But if that factory was in an area specific to business that factories do, and it's away from all the houses and everything, it wouldn't be as problematic. But with zoning restrictions, they can be super lenient to where you don't really have restrictions at all. And then they can be super strict where they can talk about like the size of your doghouse, any additions to your houses, as well as fencing. So zoning boards typically oversee this type of stuff, and you have to apply for permits of that nature. So if you don't like the rules of something, what are things you can typically do? Well, you can complain and break the rules, which some people do, but ideally, you can always ask to get something changed. And in that case, we have what are called variances and zoning changes. Now, variance is a written permission to deviate from typical zoning laws, which are often kind of minor. So, for example, let's say that you want to build onto your house, and your house can't extend among a certain square footage. Well, you might apply for a variance and be like, well, can I use this? Can I extend my house to meet the square footage because it's not going to look too bad? Or maybe because you're living in a residential area, the zoning board does not want you to conduct business from your house because that would make it then again a business within a residential area. So you can apply for a variance to operate an in-home business. So it's things of that nature. And next, we have zoning changes where you actually can have an application put in to attempt to get the zoning rules changed completely. So, how do you ensure a certain level of quality that exists in certain things? Well, you've got inspections, you've got rules, you've got standards. In this stuff, we have the idea of the yes man. If you guys have ever seen this movie, the big thing that he enters into with this movie is the covenant, and he has to stay within the covenant. He cannot deviate because of the covenant, and if he does, bad things will happen. What does this mean? The covenant, which is a fancy word for conditions, in many cases also an agreement. So, The covenants often create restrictions designed to maintain quality control over a neighborhood. So, what you guys are looking at is they're creating these restrictions, and the neighborhood needs to have a certain quality to it. So, what's going to happen is they're going to have these covenants in place. And these can be anywhere from lot size, building square footage, architectural design, even to what they prohibit having in the homes and things of that nature. So, just so you know, there are some ways that people get around for doing stuff, and this is a website called The Spite House from Good Mythical Morning. I would highly encourage you to watch it because it is very interesting to see what kind of crazy stuff people have done to their homes to get around the law and around the system. Covenants versus zoning. So, covenants can overturn permissive zoning laws. So, if a zoning law um, says one thing and a covenant says another, a covenant always, always wins. And a lot of times, what most people say is that zoning laws are typically for in the city and covenants are for out of the city. So that's kind of how a lot of people think of it. It's not always the case, but that is how a lot of people view it. And then covenants, however, must be compliant with state and federal laws. So if there's like the old school covenant from way back in the day and they start digging through the deed and the title and everything, and they find out that a covenant says that, let's say they find out that the person who created developed the land was a horrible person and said that women shouldn't own uh, the property in the area. Well, that would be against the Fair Housing Act, so therefore that covenant is not compliant with federal law, and therefore that covenant is trumped. Then obviously ladies can own the property in the area. Here is just another YouTube video that delves a little bit more into understanding what restrictive covenant means. So you can watch this and gain a little bit more explanation. So next we have what's called the easement. Now, someone has the right to use your property for a specific purpose. So these are often created by deeds, wills, or implications of previous owner. So what happens is, let's say, for instance, that in order to get to their house, your neighbor has to drive on your road. So you have a road that connects, and part of the road goes to your house, and that road is actually on your property, but your neighbor has to drive on that road that's on your property in order to get to his house. So they have an easement. So that means that, for example, previous owner is always making sure that they can have that, and they have the right to use their property for a specific purpose, i.e., getting to their house. And then courts can typically grant prescriptive easements, which is the right to do something because it's been happening and hasn't stopped. So let's say, for instance, this neighbor has been driving your road and keeps driving your road that's on your property and has been doing it for years and years and years. And then you move away, and then the person that bought your house is a grumpy old person and can't stand to have that person um, you cannot stand to have your previous neighbor driving their car on their property. So they're mad. So they say, hey, get off my property. You're not allowed to do this, blah, blah, blah. Your neighbor can actually take that person to court and say, look, I need to have an easement for this because I have been doing this for years and years and years. It's never been a problem. And this new property owner is saying that I'm not allowed to do it, even though it's always been happening. So it's one of those things you want to make sure that you're taking care of that. And just some other regulations. So all things in your home are your business. So in other words, you can do just about anything in your house except one, you cannot do things that violate zoning codes unless you have a variance written. They cannot violate the law. So for example, if if you're doing something illegal in your house, technically, that is considered to be something you shouldn't be doing, and technically, you don't have the right to do. And then finally, make it hard for other people to enjoy their home. So if you're constantly doing weird things, like for example, having paintball wars in your backyard and you're constantly shooting paintballs and missing and then hitting your neighbor's home and making their home look nasty, even though it's an accident, making their home covered in paint and shooting their windows out with paintball guns and stuff. Even though you're in your yard, you're still making it hard for your neighbors to enjoy their home, and therefore that is something that should not be done. So, another big thing that comes along with homes is that a lot of people talk about making changes to their homes, and a lot of times that's kind of tough to do because sometimes people end up with these very nice historical homes that are considered landmarks. And so, what I want you guys to do today is you guys are actually going to look through the National Register of Historic Places. So, you're going to go to the National Register of Historic Places of South Carolina. And you're just going to click around. There's a map on there. You can click around and just look at different places. And then you're going to go from counties. There's all different kind of counties on there. So you're going to pick five. And then for each county, you're going to pick one building and you're going to write the following: why it's important, include a picture of the building, and then why you chose it and your initial reaction to the history. So you could go anywhere from like York to Oconee to somewhere down in Columbia. And, you'll find that there's a lot of interesting history in South Carolina, and that there's a lot of reasons that certain things are still standing, and that why people view these as historic monuments and important places. But it's one of those things that there are actually people who have managed to purchase historical landmarks or historical buildings for residential purposes, and because they are historical landmarks, they cannot make the alterations to their home because zoning boards of state law don't allow it. But it's interesting to explore the level of history or the level of leverage that history has and the importance of housing in general. But that is your assignment for today. So turn in your notes, and I will see you guys later.